The night sky was pitch black, shrouded by thick clouds that obscured the moonlight. At the edge of the village stood an abandoned old house, surrounded by rusty iron gates overgrown with wild shrubs. The building looked desolate, with empty windows resembling dark eyes that seemed to watch anyone who dared approach. The house had long been the subject of whispers among the locals, filled with tales of eerie sounds and shadowy figures lurking inside. A young man named Ardi stood in front of the gate. He had heard countless stories about the place, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. With careful movements, he pushed the gate open, its hinges letting out a long, creaking sound that echoed in the quiet night. The path to the main door was littered with dry leaves that crunched beneath his feet. As he pushed the front door open, a sharp creak pierced the silence. The room inside was pitch dark, illuminated only by the faint beam of his small flashlight. The air was damp, thick with the scent of decay and dust. Old furniture covered in white sheets stood motionless like ghosts. A large mirror in one corner reflected Ardi's shadow, making him feel as though he was being watched. His footsteps echoed as he explored the rooms, one by one. The house's walls were stained with damp, marks and lined with cracks that resembled intricate veins. In one corner hung a crooked old painting. The face in the painting was blurred, but it seemed to stare directly at him, sending chills down his spine. As he ventured further, a sudden creak came from upstairs. The sound was heavy, like deliberate footsteps moving slowly, but purposefully. Ardi froze, his body tense. The flashlight in his hand began flickering, adding to the eerie atmosphere. He turned toward the dark staircase made of rotting wood. Curiosity urged him to ascend. Each step on the staircase groaned loudly, as if protesting his presence. On the second floor, a long corridor with doors on either side stretched out before him. The air here was colder, biting through to his bones. He moved cautiously, shining his flashlight on the doors one by one. At the end of the hallway, a door was slightly ajar, emitting a faint glow from within. Ardi approached it carefully, his heartbeat quickening with each step. Peering inside, he saw a table with a lit candle, its dim flame flickering despite the stillness of the room. The walls of the room were covered with strange markings, symbols he didn't recognize. At the center of the room sat a small, wooden doll on a tiny chair. The doll looked old and worn, its face partially peeling. As Ardi stepped closer to the doll, the sound of footsteps echoed again, this time louder, as if someone was standing directly behind him. He spun around quickly, but the hallway behind him was empty. The air grew heavier, and dark shadows began to form in the room's corners. The candle on the table flickered violently before extinguishing altogether, plunging the room into total darkness. In the deafening silence, a faint, sinister laugh echoed, sending shivers down his spine. Unbeknownst to him, the old house had already ensnared him in its web of mystery. What truly lurked within its walls? The darkness was suffocating, and the silence hung heavy in the air. Ardi stood frozen in the center of the room, his flashlight flickering weakly in his trembling hand. The sinister laugh that had echoed moments earlier still lingered in his mind, sending waves of unease coursing through him. Every instinct told him to leave, but his legs felt glued to the floor. A faint sound emerged, a soft creaking as though the wooden floorboards beneath him were shifting. The doll, which had been sitting motionless on the small chair, now seemed to be angled slightly differently. Its head was tilted toward him, its lifeless eyes appearing to stare directly into his. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Ardi forced himself to turn toward the door, but it was no longer slightly ajar. It was shut tight, as if to seal him inside. He reached for the door knob and twisted it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in as he yanked at the door repeatedly, his movements growing frantic. Suddenly, a faint whisper broke the silence. It wasn't coming from the room, but from the hallway outside. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, yet the words were incomprehensible. The faint glow of his flashlight illuminated the dark symbols scrawled on the walls, their chaotic patterns now seeming to pulse as if alive. The whispers morphed into a low, guttural growl. Ardi's breath quickened as he felt the temperature drop further. The cold air seemed to wrap around him like unseen hands, making every hair on his body stand on end. He backed away from the door, his flashlight shaking as the beam danced across the room. The growling stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of something sharp, scraping against the floor outside the room. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the door. Then, silence. Ardi held his breath, his eyes fixed on the door. The silence stretched unbearably long, and then, without warning, the doorknob began to turn slowly. His body tensed, and his mind screamed for him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but the dark hallway beyond. He hesitated, his instincts battling his curiosity. Gathering his courage, he stepped toward the doorway, his flashlight casting a weak beam into the empty corridor. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly into darkness. The doors on either side were now slightly ajar, as if inviting him to explore. The air was heavy with a strange, metallic scent. As he took his first cautious step into the hallway, the floor beneath him groaned, and a faint vibration traveled through the wood. He stopped, listening intently. The silence was oppressive, but just as he was about to move again, a soft thud echoed from one of the rooms to his right. Turning the flashlight toward the source of the sound, he saw a shadow dart across the gap in the doorway. It was quick, too quick to make out its shape, but it was enough to send his heart racing. Against his better judgment, he stepped toward the room, the flashlight trembling in his grip. The room was empty, save for a single wardrobe pushed against the far wall. The air inside was colder, and his breath was now visible in the dim light. He approached the wardrobe, drawn to it despite the dread pulling in his stomach. The closer he got, the stronger the metallic scent became. Reaching out, he hesitated for a moment before gripping the handle. Slowly, he pulled the door open, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the wardrobe was empty except for deep claw marks gouged into the wood, as if something had tried to claw its way out. Before he could react, the door to the wardrobe slammed shut with a deafening bang. The flashlight in his hand went out completely, plunging him into absolute darkness. A chilling voice whispered directly into his ear, to close for comfort. It was low, guttural, and spoke in a language he couldn't understand. His blood ran cold as the presence behind him grew palpable, the air thick with malevolence. The last thing he felt before everything went silent was an icy hand, brushing against his shoulder. The icy hand on Ardi's shoulder froze him in place. His body refused to move, paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispering voice behind him grew louder, reverberating in the pitch-black room, as though it surrounded him from every direction. His flashlight, lifeless in his grip, was no longer of any use. Summoning every ounce of courage, he forced himself to turn around, but instead of finding the source of the voice, he was greeted by nothing but darkness. The air, however, felt alive, charged with something unseen and malevolent. Suddenly, the room came alive with sound. The wardrobe behind him creaked open on its own, and the scraping of nails against wood echoed around him. The walls seemed to groan, and the temperature dropped even further, biting at his skin. A faint glow appeared from the corner of the room, illuminating the strange symbols on the walls. The markings pulsated with a sickly red light, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. In the center of the room, the doll from before now sat upright, its head tilted unnaturally, as though staring directly at him. Ardi's instincts screamed for him to run, but every door he tried to reach was now blocked by an invisible force. No matter how hard he pushed or pulled, the exits refused to yield. Panic set in as the symbols on the walls began to shift, their shapes twisting into grotesque forms that seemed almost alive. Then, a loud, guttural voice boomed through the room. It wasn't a whisper this time, it was a command, deep and resonant, though the language was still incomprehensible. Ardi clutched his head as the sound pierced his ears, filling his mind with images he couldn't understand, flashes of fire, figures cloaked in shadow, and a family standing in the very room he was in. The vision lingered. He saw the family's faces twisted in terror, their mouths open in silent screams as a dark figure loomed over them. The father collapsed first, followed by the mother, and finally a small child who clutched the wooden doll tightly before falling lifeless to the floor. The dark figure turned its attention to Ardi, its hollow eyes burning into his soul. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Ardi gasping for air. He now understood the house was cursed, a prison for the souls that had perished within its walls. He was no longer just a trespasser. He had become a part of the house's story. Desperate, he began to search for any way out. His fingers scraped against the cold walls, but there was nothing, no windows, no cracks, no escape. The whispers returned, louder now, growing into a cacophony of voices. They chanted in unison, their tone both sorrowful and enraged. The floor beneath him began to crack, and a deep red light shone through the gaps. The air filled with the stench of sulfur, and the ground trembled violently. The doll on the chair suddenly floated into the air, its head spinning grotesquely before stopping to face him. Its mouth, once just painted wood, opened slowly, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. The voices stopped. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Ardi's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he watched the doll. Its hollow eyes began to weep like tears, and from its mouth, the booming voice returned. "You should not have come." The floor beneath Ardi gave way, and he fell into the void below. His screams echoed endlessly as he plunged into the darkness, the red light growing dimmer above him. The symbols, the voices, the house all disappeared as he descended deeper and deeper, until there was nothing left but silence and blackness. No one ever saw Ardi again. The house, still standing at the edge of the village, remained a silent sentinel, its dark secrets hidden within. Those who dared to approach claimed they could hear faint whispers on quiet nights, as if the house was calling for its next victim. The mystery of the old house was far from over. The end.